The horn rang out 3 times across the valley, and every wolf in the Moonfire pack froze where they stood. Wren felt her heart drop before she even turned around. 3 horn blasts meant only one thing. A judgment had been passed, and someone was about to lose everything. She was kneeling in the herb garden behind the healer's cabin, her hands still covered in dirt, when 2 guards arrived to take her to the Great Hall. She did not resist. She had learned long ago that resisting only made things worse for an Omega, especially one without a family name to protect her. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked between the guards with her chin steady, even though her stomach twisted with dread. Inside the Great Hall, torches burned along the stone walls, and every senior wolf of the pack stood in a wide circle. At the center of that circle sat King Alaric, tall and broad-shouldered, his gray eyes sharp and unreadable. Beside him stood Edmund, his most trusted advisor, a thin man with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. It was Edmund who spoke first. "Wren, daughter of no one, you stand accused of poisoning the grain stores meant for the winter," he said, his voice carrying easily through the hall. 3 sacks of feed were found tainted, and you were the last to enter the storehouse before the sickness spread among our hunting hounds. Wren's mouth went dry. "I did not touch the grain," she said. "I only went to fetch feed for the goats, as I do every morning." "A convenient story," Edmund replied smoothly. "But we have a witness." A young wolf named Corin stepped forward, a boy who worked in the stables and rarely met anyone's eyes. He would not look at Wren now either. "I saw her near the storehouse late at night," he mumbled. "I did not see what she did, but she was there. It was not proof. It was barely even an accusation with any weight to it." But the hall had already made its decision before Wren ever walked through the doors, and she understood that clearly now. She looked toward King Alaric, hoping for a flicker of doubt in his expression, some sign that he remembered the years she had spent caring for his sons after his mate had passed. She found nothing there but exhaustion and distance, the look of a king who had too many decisions to make, and too little time to make them carefully. "The council has voted," Alaric said finally, his voice heavy. "Wren is to be banished from Moonfire lands by sundown. She may take only what she can carry." A murmur passed through the hall, but no one objected. No one ever objected to the king's decisions, not even when those decisions were built on shaky ground. Wren felt the eyes of the pack on her, some curious, some pitying, most simply indifferent. She was an Omega. She had no family to speak for her, no mate to stand beside her, no rank that gave her voice any weight. In the eyes of the pack, she was replaceable. As the guards led her out of the hall, she caught sight of 3 small figures pressed against the wall near the entrance, half hidden in the shadows. Cade, the eldest of the king's sons, stood with his arms crossed and his jaw tight, trying to look older than his years. Beside him, Theo shifted from foot to foot, his eyes wide and confused. And little Finn, barely more than a pup, clutched the hem of Cade's tunic with both hands, his lower lip trembling. Wren's heart ached at the sight of them. She wanted to go to them, to tell them this was all a mistake and that everything would be fine. But the guards did not slow their pace, and soon the boys disappeared from view behind her. She was given only an hour to gather her things. Her small room behind the healer's cabin held little of value, just a change of clothes, a wooden comb her mother had left her, and a pouch of dried herbs she had collected over the years for treating fevers and cuts. She packed them all into a single bag, her hands shaking slightly, not from fear, but from disbelief. She had served this pack faithfully for as long as she could remember. She had tended wounds, calmed frightened pups during storms, and sat beside sick elders through long nights. None of that seemed to matter now. As she worked, her mind drifted back to the years she had spent with the 3 cubs. She remembered the night Finn was born, how the healer had placed the tiny mewling pup in her arms, while the king stood frozen with grief beside his mate's bed. The queen had not survived the birth, and in the chaos and sorrow that followed, it was Wren who had rocked baby Finn to sleep night after night, hummed old songs to Theo when nightmares woke him, and listened patiently, while Cade, trying so hard to be strong for his brothers, quietly cried into her shoulder when no one else was watching. The king had always been kind to her from a distance, grateful in the way a busy man is grateful for help he does not have time to notice closely. But over the years, as pack politics consumed more and more of his attention, it was Wren who became the steady presence in his sons' lives. She braided herbs into their fur to ward off insects in summer. She taught them which berries were safe to eat in the forest, and which ones would make them sick. She was not their mother, but she was the closest thing to one they had ever known. And now she was being sent away, accused of a crime she had never committed, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. By the time the sun began sinking toward the mountains, Ren stood at the edge of Moonfire territory, flanked by 2 silent guards. The golden light stretched long shadows across the dirt path, leading into the wilderness beyond the border stones. She turned back once, unable to help herself, and looked up at the castle rising above the trees, its towers catching the last light of day. Somewhere inside those walls were 3 boys who had lost their mother once already, and were now losing her too, without even a chance to say goodbye. "Move along," one of the guards said, not unkindly, but firmly. Ren took a slow breath and stepped past the border stones. The moment her feet crossed the line, the guards turned and walked back toward the castle, without another word, as if she had already ceased to exist. She stood alone at the edge of the unfamiliar forest, the safety of the only home she had ever known now behind her, and the unknown darkness of the wild spreading out ahead. She did not cry. She had promised herself she would not until she was far enough away that no one could see. Instead, she adjusted the bag on her shoulder and began walking, following a narrow deer trail that wound between the pine trees. The forest was quiet, except for the occasional call of a bird settling in for the night, and the soft crunch of her footsteps on fallen leaves. She had walked for perhaps 20 minutes when a strange feeling crept over her, a prickling sense that she was being watched. She stopped and turned slowly, scanning the shadows between the trees. At first she saw nothing, only the deepening blue of dusk settling over the woods. But then a branch snapped somewhere behind a cluster of ferns, followed by a muffled sound that was unmistakably a small voice trying to shush another. Ren's breath caught in her throat. She knew that voice. "Cade?" she called softly, taking a cautious step toward the ferns. "Theo? Is that you?" For a moment there was only silence. Then, one by one, 3 small shapes emerged from the undergrowth, looking sheepish and thoroughly unprepared for the forest at night. Cade stood at the front, trying to appear composed, despite the twigs tangled in his hair. Theo stood just behind him, breathing hard from running, and Finn, the smallest of the 3, immediately abandoned any pretense of bravery and ran straight into Ren's arms, burying his face against her side. "What are you 3 doing out here?" Ren asked, dropping to her knees so she could look at each of them properly. Her voice was firm, but her hands trembled as she checked them over for any sign of injury. "Does your father know you left the castle?" Cade shook his head, his expression stubborn. "We heard the servants talking. They said you didn't do anything wrong, that it was all a lie, but nobody would listen. We couldn't just let you go alone. We followed your scent," Theo added, sounding both proud and a little embarrassed. "It wasn't easy. You walk fast." Ren felt a lump rise in her throat. These boys, still so young, had slipped past castle guards and ventured into the wild forest at dusk, all because they refused to believe she was guilty, and because they could not bear to let her leave without them. It was reckless, it was dangerous, and it was, in its own way, the kindest thing anyone had done for her all day. "You have to go back," she said gently, though her voice cracked slightly. "It's getting dark, and this forest isn't safe for cubs your age. Your father will be worried sick." "We're not going back without you," Finn mumbled into her side, his voice muffled but firm. "Finn." "He's right," Cade interrupted, standing a little taller. "You didn't do anything wrong. Everyone just believed Edmund, because he's clever with words. If we go back and tell father the truth, maybe he'll listen. But we're not leaving you out here alone in the dark, not after everything you've done for us." Ren looked at the 3 of them, each one so different, yet all equally determined, and she felt something shift in her chest, a warmth she had not expected to feel on the worst day of her life. She had lost her place in the pack, her home, and her reputation, but standing before her were 3 young lives who still believed in her without question. The forest around them was growing darker by the minute, shadows deepening between the trees, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called out into the stillness. Ren knew they could not stay where they were much longer. The cubs were untrained, unprepared, and far from the safety of the castle walls. Whatever came next, she would have to find a way to protect them, even though she herself had nowhere safe left to go. She stood, taking Finn's small paw in one hand and gesturing for the other two boys to stay close. "All right," she said quietly. "We need to find shelter before it gets fully dark. Stay close to me, and do exactly as I say." The boys nodded, falling into step behind her, as she led them deeper into the unfamiliar woods, the last light of day fading fast above the treetops, and the true danger of the night still waiting, unseen, somewhere ahead. Back at the castle, the halls buzzed with the ordinary business of evening. Servants carried trays of food to the dining hall, guards changed their posts along the battlements, and the fires in the great hearths were stoked high against the coming chill. King Alaric sat in his study, staring at a report from the border patrols without truly reading a single word of it. His mind kept drifting back to the trial earlier that day, to the look on Wren's face as she had been led away, and to a nagging unease he could not quite name. He told himself the council had made the right decision. Edmund was his most trusted advisor, and the evidence, however thin, had been enough to convince the entire circle of elders. And yet, some part of him kept replaying the years Wren had spent raising his sons almost single-handedly, while he buried himself in the endless demands of ruling a pack. He remembered her patience, her gentleness, the way his boys had always run to her first with their scraped knees and their nightmares. A soft knock came at his study door, and Mira, the pack's head healer, an elderly woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner, stepped inside without waiting for permission. "My king," she said, her voice tight with worry, "I went to check on the boys before their evening meal, as I always do. Their chambers are empty." Alaric looked up sharply. "Empty? Perhaps they are in the training yard, or with the stable hands." "I checked both," Mira said. "No one has seen them since this afternoon, since before the trial ended." A cold weight settled in Alaric's chest. He stood so quickly his chair scraped loudly against the stone floor. "Search the entire castle," he ordered, striding past her into the hallway. "Every room, every tower, every corner of the grounds. Now." Word spread through the castle like wildfire, and within minutes, guards, servants, and pack members were combing through every corridor and courtyard, calling the boys' names into the growing darkness. But as the search stretched on with no sign of the cubs, a terrible thought began to form in Alaric's mind, one he did not want to acknowledge, but could not ignore. He thought of Wren, walking alone toward the border as the sun set, and he thought of his sons, who had loved her more fiercely than he had ever fully understood. And slowly, with a dread that curled cold and heavy in his stomach, King Alaric began to suspect exactly where his sons had gone, and exactly how much danger they might already be in. Deep in the forest, the last traces of daylight had vanished completely, replaced by a silver wash of moonlight filtering through the canopy above. Wren had found a shallow hollow beneath the roots of an old fallen tree, just large enough to shelter the three boys from the wind. She gathered dry leaves and moss to line the space, working quickly, while keeping one ear tuned to the sounds of the forest around them. "Are we going to sleep here?" Theo asked, peering doubtfully at the small hollow. "Just for a little while," Wren said, trying to keep her voice calm and steady for their sake. "We'll rest here until the moon is higher, and then we'll figure out the safest way forward." Finn yawned despite himself, exhaustion finally catching up with him after the excitement of sneaking out of the castle. He curled up against Wren's side without complaint, and within minutes his breathing had evened out into the soft rhythm of sleep. Theo settled nearby, though he fought to keep his eyes open, clearly determined not to miss anything important. Cade, however, remained sitting upright at the edge of the hollow, watching the darkness beyond the trees with a seriousness that seemed far too heavy for a boy his age. "You should rest too," Wren said quietly. "Someone should keep watch," Cade replied. Wren studied him for a moment, the moonlight catching the stubborn set of his jaw. He reminded her so much of his father in that instant, the same instinct to protect others, even at the cost of his own comfort. "All right," she said gently, "but wake me if you hear anything unusual. You don't have to carry this alone." Cade nodded, though his shoulders remained tense. After a few minutes of silence, he spoke again, his voice quieter now, almost hesitant. "Do you think Father believes you're guilty?" The question caught Wren off guard, and she took a moment before answering honestly. "I think your father has a great many things pulling at his attention, and sometimes that makes it hard to see clearly. I don't think he is a cruel wolf. I think he trusted the wrong voice today." "Edmund," Cade said, his tone sharpening with dislike. He's always smiling, but I've never trusted him. He looks at us like we're pieces on a game board, not like we're actually his." Ren said nothing, though privately she shared the same unease about the advisor. She had noticed, over the years, how Edmund seemed to appear whenever opportunities for influence arose, and how conveniently things seemed to work out in his favor. But voicing suspicion without proof would help no one, especially not 3 young cubs already frightened and far from home. "Try to rest," she said instead. "Whatever tomorrow brings, we'll face it together." Cade finally allowed himself to lean back against the tree roots, though sleep did not come easily. Ren stayed awake long after the boys had drifted off, listening to the symphony of night sounds around them, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of small creatures moving through the underbrush, the whisper of wind through the high branches. She thought of the long road ahead, uncertain and dangerous, and of the responsibility now resting on her shoulders. She had lost everything that afternoon, but she would not lose these 3 boys as well, not while she still had breath in her body. Back at the castle, the search had expanded well beyond the walls. Guards on horseback fanned out along the main roads, torches held high, while trackers examined the ground near the stables and the kitchen gardens for any sign of small footprints. King Alaric himself had changed out of his formal robes into simpler traveling clothes, refusing to remain behind while his sons were missing. "My king," said Garrick, the head of the castle guard, a broad-shouldered wolf with years of tracking experience. "We found signs near the eastern wall, small paw prints, heading toward the tree line, toward the border." Alaric's stomach dropped. "Toward where Ren was sent." "It would seem so," Garrick admitted grimly. Edmund, who had joined the search party more out of obligation than concern, cleared his throat. "My king, perhaps this proves something about the Omega after all. Perhaps she lured the boys away in some act of spite." Alaric rounded on him with such sudden fury that Edmund actually took a step back. "Watch your words carefully, Edmund. That Omega raised my sons with more patience and devotion than most in this castle have ever shown them, myself included. If anything has happened to them tonight, I promise you, we will examine every decision made in that trial, far more closely than we did the first time." Edmund fell silent, his expression carefully neutral, though something flickered behind his eyes that Alaric was too distracted to notice. "Assemble the search party," Alaric ordered, turning back to Garrick. "We leave within the hour. I will lead the search myself. My king, the border territory is unfamiliar wilderness. It would be wiser to send trained trackers while you remain here to coordinate." "My sons are out there," Alaric said, his voice low and final. "I will not sit behind these walls while they face the dark alone." Garrick bowed his head and moved quickly to gather the search party. Within the hour, a line of torches stretched out from the castle gates, moving steadily toward the forest border, each flickering flame a small point of hope pushing back against the vast darkness of the unknown wilderness ahead. As the search party approached the border stones, Alaric found himself staring at the very spot where he had ordered Ren to be cast out only hours earlier. The weight of that decision pressed down on him now with a force he had not anticipated, and for the first time since ascending to leadership of the pack, he questioned whether haste and pressure had led him to fail the people who depended on him most. He thought of his sons out there in the dark, following an Omega they trusted completely, and he thought of Ren, alone and banished, now unexpectedly burdened with protecting 3 cubs through unfamiliar and possibly dangerous territory. Whatever mistakes had been made that day, one thing had become clear to him with painful certainty. His sons believed in Ren far more deeply than the council ever had, and that belief alone was enough to make him question everything he thought he understood about the trial's outcome. "We move quickly," he told Garrick, his eyes fixed on the dark line of trees ahead. "And we do not stop until we find them." The search party pressed forward into the forest, torches casting long, dancing shadows between the trunks, while somewhere deeper in that same darkness, 3 sleeping cubs and 1 determined Omega remained unaware of the storm of worry and doubt now moving steadily toward them through the night. Morning arrived slowly, gray light seeping through the branches overhead before the sun had fully climbed above the mountains. Ren woke first, her body stiff from sitting upright through the night, and gently roused the 3 boys. Finn grumbled sleepily. Theo rubbed his eyes and asked immediately if there was anything to eat, and Cade sat up at once, alert and watchful, as though he had never truly slept at all. We need to keep moving, Wren said, brushing leaves from her clothes. But first, let's find something for breakfast. I know a few plants nearby that should help. She led the boys a short distance from their shelter, to a cluster of berry bushes she had spotted the night before, their dark fruit glistening with morning dew. She checked each cluster carefully, before letting the cubs eat, explaining as she went which berries were safe and which ones to always avoid, a lesson she had taught them many times before within the safety of the castle gardens, though never with quite so much urgency behind it. These ones look almost the same, Theo said, pointing to a similar-looking bush a few steps away. Good eye, Wren said approvingly, but see how the leaves have a slightly different shape, more pointed at the tip? Those berries would make you very sick. Always look closely before you trust what something seems to be. Finn munched happily on his handful of berries, seemingly unbothered by the danger of the previous night, while Cade ate quickly and efficiently, his eyes constantly scanning the tree line, as though danger might appear at any moment. As they continued walking through the forest, following a faint trail that Wren hoped would lead them toward a small village she remembered visiting years ago, the terrain began to change. The trees grew closer together, their trunks thicker and older, and the light filtering through the canopy grew dimmer even as the morning wore on. Wren felt an uneasy prickle along the back of her neck, the same instinct that had once warned her, years ago, to avoid a stretch of forest known among the pack elders as contested territory, land that no single pack fully controlled, and where rogue wolves without pack loyalty sometimes wandered. Stay close to me, she told the boys quietly, adjusting their path slightly to avoid a particularly dense section of undergrowth, and keep your voices low from here on. Why? Theo whispered, though he obeyed immediately, sensing the shift in her tone. This part of the forest doesn't belong to any pack, Wren explained carefully, not wanting to frighten them more than necessary, but knowing they deserved honesty. That means the wolves who live here don't answer to any king, and they don't always welcome strangers kindly. Cade's ears flattened slightly at this, though he said nothing, simply moving closer to his younger brothers in a silent, protective gesture that reminded Wren painfully of how young he still truly was, despite carrying himself with such seriousness. They walked for hours, pausing only briefly to rest and drink from a clear stream they crossed along the way. Wren used the break to check the small scrapes on Finn's paws from the previous night's scramble through the underbrush, cleaning them gently with water and a pinch of dried herb from her pouch. Finn winced but did not complain, watching her work with quiet trust. You're very good at fixing things, he said softly. I've had a lot of practice, Wren replied with a small smile, thinking of countless scraped knees and skinned elbows over the years. Mostly thanks to you three. Theo laughed at that, and even Cade allowed himself a brief, tired smile before his expression settled back into watchfulness. As the day stretched toward afternoon, they came upon the edge of a wide, rushing river, cutting through the forest floor, its waters swollen from recent rain. The crossing point Wren remembered from years past, a series of flat stones spanning the width of the river, had clearly shifted since her last visit, some stones now submerged beneath the fast-moving current. We'll have to find another way across, she murmured, studying the water with a frown. It was then that Cade's ears suddenly pricked upward, his entire body going rigid. Someone's coming, he whispered urgently. Wren froze, listening intently, and within moments she heard it too. The soft but unmistakable sound of paws moving through the underbrush behind them, not the careless rustle of a curious deer or small animal, but the deliberate, careful movement of something tracking them with purpose. Get behind me, she said quietly, but firmly, positioning herself between the boys and the sound. All of you. Now. The boys obeyed instantly, pressing close together behind her, and for a long, tense moment, the forest around them fell utterly silent, as though even the birds had stopped to listen. Then, from between the trees on the opposite bank of the river, a lean gray wolf emerged, its eyes fixed directly on them, with an intensity that sent a cold chill down Wren's spine. It was not alone. Two more shapes moved into view behind it, flanking their leader, with the practiced discipline of wolves, who had hunted together many times before. Wren's mind raced. These were not Moonfire wolves, and their markings told her clearly they belonged to no established pack territory at all. Rogue wolves, unpredictable, and answering to no laws but their own. Behind her, She felt Finn's small paw grip the back of her tunic tightly, and she reached back without turning to give his paw a reassuring squeeze, even as her eyes remained locked on the wolves across the water. "We mean no harm," Wren called out steadily, keeping her voice calm despite the pounding of her heart. "We're only passing through." The lead wolf tilted his head slightly, studying her with an unreadable expression. "Nobody passes through this stretch of forest without paying a toll," he said, his voice rough and low, "especially not with cubs so young, and so far from any pack protection." Wren felt the danger in his words settle over her like a physical weight. There was no easy way across the river, no quick path of retreat that would not expose the boys to greater risk, and no guarantee that reasoning alone would be enough to satisfy wolves, who clearly saw an advantage in their vulnerable position. She needed a plan, and she needed one quickly, because the lead wolf was already taking his first slow, deliberate step down toward the water's edge. Wren's thoughts moved quickly, as the lead wolf continued his slow approach toward the water's edge. She had no weapon, no pack of her own standing behind her, and 3 frightened cubs depending entirely on her judgment. Whatever she chose to do next would decide what happened in the next few minutes, and there was no room left for hesitation. "Cade," she whispered without turning her head, "take your brothers and move slowly back toward the thick brush behind us. Stay low, and do not run unless I tell you to." "I'm not leaving you," Cade whispered back fiercely. "You are protecting your brothers," Wren said, her voice sharp but controlled. "That is what I need from you right now, trust me." After a tense pause, Cade nodded once and began guiding Theo and Finn backward, step by careful step, while Wren remained facing the river, her posture deliberately calm, even as her mind worked furiously. She reached into the pouch at her side, her fingers closing around a small bundle of dried herbs she had gathered specifically for their strong, sharp smell, often used back at the castle to keep insects away from the stables. It was not a weapon, but it was something. "There's sickness in this water," Wren called out suddenly, raising her voice just enough to carry clearly across the river. "A fever, spreading among the fish, and the creatures that drink from this stream, further downriver. I've been sent to gather herbs to treat it, before it spreads to the forest animals. You would be wise to keep your distance from crossing here yourselves." The lead wolf paused at the water's edge, his ears flicking with sudden uncertainty. Rogue wolves, without the safety net of a healer or pack resources, often feared illness more than almost anything else, knowing how quickly sickness could tear through a small, unprotected group, with no one to treat it. Wren pressed her advantage, holding up the bundle of pungent herbs, so its sharp scent carried on the breeze between them. "I don't wish to spread this any further than I have to," she continued, keeping her tone even and practical, as though she were simply stating an unfortunate fact, rather than pleading for her life and the lives of the cubs behind her. "We'll be gone from this stretch of river within the hour, and you'll never have to think of us again." The 3 rogue wolves exchanged uncertain glances, clearly weighing the unknown risk of illness against whatever gain they had hoped to find in cornering Alone Omega and her charges. The lead wolf's eyes narrowed, studying Wren carefully, searching her face for any sign of deception. Wren held his gaze steadily, refusing to let even a flicker of fear show, though her heart hammered so loudly she was certain he must be able to hear it from across the water. Finally, after a long, agonizing pause, the lead wolf took a slow step backward. "Keep moving then," he said gruffly, "and find another river to cross next time." Without waiting to see if he might change his mind, Wren turned and walked briskly back toward the boys, forcing herself to keep her pace steady, rather than break into a run that might invite pursuit. Only once they were safely deep within the cover of the trees, well out of sight from the riverbank, did she finally allow herself to exhale the breath she had been holding. "That was amazing," Theo whispered, his eyes wide with a mixture of relief and admiration. "You made them leave without even fighting." "Fighting is rarely the smartest choice," Wren said quietly, kneeling down to check that all 3 boys were unharmed, "especially when you're outnumbered. Sometimes the cleverest solution is the one that lets everyone walk away safely." Cade studied her with a newfound respect in his eyes. "How did you know that would work?" "I didn't, not for certain," Wren admitted honestly. "But I know that fear of the unknown is often stronger than fear of what's right in front of you. I gambled that they'd rather avoid a risk they couldn't see than take a chance they could clearly measure. They moved quickly and quietly away from the river, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the rogue wolves, before Ren finally allowed them to slow their pace. Her hands, she noticed distantly, had not stopped trembling since the encounter, though she kept her expression calm for the boys' sake. The forest around them seemed to press in closer now, every shadow suddenly more suspicious, every distant sound more alarming than it had been that morning. As dusk began to settle for the second time since their journey began, Ren found a small rocky outcropping that offered better shelter than the previous night's hollow, a shallow cave tucked beneath an overhang of stone, hidden from casual view by a thick screen of ferns. She settled the boys inside, sharing what little food remained in her bag, mostly dried fruit and a small portion of bread she had packed hastily before her banishment. Finn, exhausted from the day's fear and walking, fell asleep almost instantly against Ren's side. Theo lasted only a little longer before his eyes grew heavy and his breathing slowed into the steady rhythm of sleep. Cade, as always, fought against his own exhaustion, determined to stay alert, though Ren could see the toll the day had taken on him in the shadows beneath his young eyes. "You did well today," she told him softly. "Getting your brothers to safety without panicking, that took real courage." Cade was quiet for a moment before he spoke, his voice smaller than usual. "I was scared. The whole time, I was scared." "Being brave doesn't mean not being scared," Ren said gently. "It means doing what needs to be done anyway, even when you're frightened. You did that today. Your father would be proud of you, and so am I." Cade's expression flickered with something complicated, gratitude mixed with worry, and after a long pause he finally allowed his eyes to close, leaning against his sleeping brothers as sleep claimed him at last. Ren remained awake, watching over the three of them in the dim light filtering through the ferns, her thoughts drifting to the uncertain road still ahead, and to the question that troubled her most deeply of all, whether the danger they had narrowly escaped by the river was the last they would face, or merely the first of many trials still waiting somewhere in the darkness beyond the firelight. Back at Moonfire Castle, the search party had pressed through the night without rest, following the scattered trail of small footprints and broken branches that marked the cub's path through the forest. King Alaric rode at the front of the group, his usual composed bearing replaced by a restless urgency that his guards had rarely witnessed in all their years serving him. Every hour that passed without word of his sons felt like a small piece of him breaking away. "My king," Garrick said as dawn began to break over the treetops, "we found signs of a struggle near the river crossing to the east. Wolf tracks, unfamiliar to our pack, and scattered footprints suggesting your sons passed through recently." Alaric's blood ran cold. "A struggle? Are there any signs of injury? Any blood?" Garrick shook his head carefully. "None that we could find, my king. It appears whatever happened here ended without violence, though I cannot say for certain what occurred." Alaric dismounted and knelt beside the riverbank himself, studying the churned earth and the faint impressions left in the mud. Something about the scene did not sit easily with him, an unresolved tension he could not quite name, though he forced himself to focus on the practical matter of tracking his sons, rather than dwelling on fears he could not yet confirm. Edmund, who had insisted on accompanying the search party despite Alaric's earlier sharp words, lingered near the back of the group, his expression carefully composed. He had said little since the previous night's confrontation, though Garrick, ever observant, had noticed the advisor's unusual nervousness whenever the conversation turned toward the trial that had led to Ren's banishment in the first place. "My king," Edmund said now, stepping forward with practiced smoothness, "perhaps it would be wiser to send word back to the castle and regroup with a larger force. This territory grows increasingly unfamiliar and dangerous the further we travel." "My sons are somewhere in this dangerous, unfamiliar territory, Edmund," Alaric replied without looking up from the tracks he was studying. "I have no intention of turning back." "Of course, my king," Edmund said quickly, though something in his tone made Garrick study him more closely. The head guard had served Moonfire Pack for over 20 years, and in that time, he had developed a keen sense for reading the wolves around him. Edmund's nervousness felt different from ordinary concern, sharper somehow, more calculated. As the search party continued along the riverbank, Garrick found a moment to fall into step beside Alaric, lowering his voice so only the king could hear. "My king, forgive me for speaking plainly, but I find it curious that Edmund pushed so firmly for a swift trial yesterday, and now seems equally eager to slow our search for your sons today. Alaric glanced sideways at his head guard, a flicker of the same suspicion he had been trying to ignore, rising once again to the surface. You believe there is more to this than a simple case of poisoned grain? I believe, Garrick said carefully, that the stable boy who testified against Wren has always struck me as a nervous sort, easily influenced by those with more power than himself. And I believe Edmund has grown increasingly comfortable positioning his own niece within the castle in recent months, always finding small ways to suggest she might make a fitting caretaker for the young princes. The pieces began to align in Alaric's mind with uncomfortable clarity. He remembered now, with fresh eyes, how Edmund had subtly praised his niece Clara's patience and gentle nature on several occasions recently, always in passing, always seemingly harmless, yet consistently planting the same quiet suggestion. He remembered too how quickly Edmund had pushed for Wren's swift banishment, discouraging any deeper investigation into the actual source of the tainted grain. If what you suspect is true, Alaric said slowly, his voice hardening, then I banished an innocent wolf who raised my sons with more devotion than most in this castle have ever shown, based on manipulated evidence, designed to serve someone else's ambitions. I cannot yet prove it, my king, Garrick said honestly, but I believe it warrants a closer look once your sons are safely returned home. Alaric said nothing more, but the resolve hardening in his expression told Garrick everything he needed to know. Whatever guilt and doubt had already been building within the king since the previous evening now solidified into something far more purposeful. Whatever the truth of Edmund's involvement turned out to be, Alaric intended to uncover it fully, once his sons were safe. They pressed onward through the morning, following the faint trail Wren had left as she guided the boys away from the river crossing. The path grew increasingly difficult to follow as it wound through denser sections of forest, and more than once the search party paused, uncertain which direction to take next. It was Garrick, with his years of tracking experience, who finally spotted a small tuft of fabric caught on a low branch, matching the description of the tunic Finn had been wearing the previous day. This way, Garrick called out, and the search party surged forward with renewed determination, following the fresh trail deeper into the forest, unaware that they were now drawing steadily closer to the very spot where Wren and the 3 cubs had taken shelter for the second night, resting uneasily beneath the stone overhang, still recovering from their narrow escape at the river's edge. As the sun climbed higher overhead, casting warm light through gaps in the canopy, hope began to grow within the search party, for the first time since the boys had disappeared. But unbeknownst to King Alaric and his wolves, the same forest that sheltered his sons also harbored the rogue wolves who had confronted them the day before, wolves who had not entirely abandoned their interest in the small, vulnerable group that had slipped so narrowly through their grasp once already. Wren woke before the sun had fully risen, her senses sharpened by an uneasy feeling she could not quite explain. The boys still slept soundly around her, exhausted from 2 days of hard travel, but something about the stillness of the forest outside their small shelter felt different from the quiet peace of the previous night. She listened carefully, her ears straining against the silence, and after a long moment she caught it, a faint but distinct rustle of movement somewhere beyond the ferns, screening their hiding place. She gently woke Cade first, pressing a finger to her lips to signal quiet. He blinked awake instantly, his instincts sharpened after 2 days of danger, and understood immediately from her expression that something was wrong. Together, they carefully roused Theo and Finn, keeping their movements slow and their voices silent. "Someone's out there," Wren whispered, barely audible even to the boys pressed close beside her. "The wolves from the river?" Theo whispered back, fear flashing across his young face. "I don't know," Wren admitted honestly. "It could be them, or it could be something else entirely. Either way, we need to move carefully." She peered through a small gap in the ferns, screening their hiding spot, scanning the tree line beyond for any sign of movement. For a long moment, she saw nothing but the soft gray light of early morning filtering through the branches. Then, further in the distance, she caught a glimpse of the same lean gray wolf who had confronted them at the river, moving cautiously through the trees, clearly searching for something, or someone. Her stomach tightened. The rogue wolves had not given up after all. Whether driven by lingering suspicion about her claim of sickness in the water, or simple curiosity about what an Omega and 3 young cubs might be worth as leverage, They had tracked her scent through the night, and were now closing in on their hiding place. "We need to move, quietly and quickly," Ren whispered, gathering their few belongings with practiced efficiency. "Stay low, and follow me exactly." She led the boys carefully out of the shelter, moving in the opposite direction from where she had spotted the rogue wolf, hoping to put distance between them before their absence from the shelter was noticed. But the forest floor, damp from recent rain, made silent movement difficult, and within minutes, a sharp howl rose up behind them, a signal call that sent ice through Ren's veins. "Run," she said urgently, no longer bothering to whisper. "Now, all of you, stay together and run." The boys obeyed instantly, sprinting through the underbrush as fast as their young legs could carry them, with Ren close behind, constantly glancing over her shoulder to gauge how quickly their pursuers were closing the distance. The sound of pursuit grew louder behind them, branches snapping, paws pounding against the forest floor, and Ren realized with dawning dread that there was no clever trick of words that would save them this time. The rogue wolves had returned in greater numbers, no longer willing to risk being fooled a second time. Ahead of them, the trees began to thin slightly, revealing a rocky slope leading upward toward a cluster of large boulders. Ren made a split-second decision, angling the boys' path toward the rocks, hoping the uneven terrain might slow their pursuers or offer some defensible position if the chase came to its inevitable conclusion. "Climb," she ordered as they reached the base of the boulders. "As high as you can, quickly." Cade helped boost Finn up onto the first ledge, while Theo scrambled up beside them with surprising agility, born of pure adrenaline. Ren turned to face their pursuers just as the lean gray wolf and 4 others emerged from the tree line below, spreading out to block any path of retreat. "Clever trick with the sickness story," the lead wolf growled, his earlier caution replaced now with something colder and more calculating. "But my pack doesn't take kindly to being fooled twice. I only wanted to keep my charges safe," Ren said, positioning herself between the rogue wolves and the boulder where the boys now huddled together, watching with wide, frightened eyes. "I have nothing of value to offer you, only 3 young cubs who have never done anyone harm." "Young cubs from a wealthy pack make excellent bargaining pieces," the lead wolf said, taking a slow step closer. "Perhaps your king would pay quite handsomely to have his sons returned unharmed." Ren's heart pounded, but she refused to let fear show in her expression. You would be starting a conflict with an entire kingdom over cubs who are worth far more trouble to hold than they are worth in ransom. Moonfire's king does not respond kindly to threats against his family. "A risk we are willing to take," the wolf replied, unmoved by her warning, his companions beginning to spread further around the base of the boulders, cutting off any remaining avenue of escape. Ren's mind raced desperately for another solution, another clever angle that might buy them time or turn the situation in their favor, but this time, the rogue wolves seemed far less inclined to listen to reason. She glanced back at the boys, huddled together on the rocky ledge above her, Finn trembling visibly, Theo pale with fear, and Cade positioned protectively in front of his younger brothers despite his own obvious terror. Whatever happened next, Ren understood, with sudden, sharp clarity, that she alone stood between these rogue wolves and the 3 young lives she had sworn, without ever speaking the words aloud, to protect at any cost. The howl that had signaled the rogue wolves' pursuit carried further through the forest than any of them realized, reaching the ears of King Alaric's search party, just as they crested a low ridge less than a mile away. Alaric froze mid-stride, his entire body going rigid at the sound. "That call," Garrick said grimly, already turning his horse toward the source. "That's a hunting signal. Wolves closing in on prey." Alaric did not wait for further explanation. He broke into a full run, faster than he had moved in years, driven by a fear so absolute it burned away every ounce of exhaustion from the long search. Garrick and the rest of the party surged forward behind him, weapons drawn, following the fading echo of the howl through the trees. They crashed through the underbrush at a desperate pace, branches tearing at their clothes, until the trees finally opened onto the rocky slope, where Ren stood alone, before 5 rogue wolves, her 3 sons trapped on the ledge above her, with nowhere left to run. "Cade! Theo! Finn!" Alaric's voice tore through the clearing, raw with a fear and relief so powerful it startled even the rogue wolves into momentary stillness. The lead rogue wolf turned sharply at the sound of approaching numbers, his earlier confidence faltering as he took in the sight of Alaric and his fully armed search party pouring into the clearing. Garrick moved swiftly to Alaric's side, positioning the rest of the party in a wide arc that quickly surrounded the rogue wolves, cutting off any hope of retreat. "You stand before the King of Moonfire," Garrick announced, his voice carrying the full authority of his position. "These are his sons you threaten, and this entire pack now stands ready to answer for whatever harm you intended toward them." The rogue wolves exchanged uneasy glances, clearly recalculating the odds now that they faced a force many times larger than their own small group. The lead wolf's gaze flicked between Alaric's furious expression and the ring of armed guards closing steadily around him, and after a tense moment of hesitation, he made the only sensible choice available. "We meant no true harm," he said quickly, backing away with his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "Merely seeking passage rights through contested territory. We'll trouble you no further." "See that you don't," Alaric growled, his eyes never leaving the rogue wolf, even as the group began retreating swiftly into the trees, abandoning their earlier ambitions, the moment the true cost of pursuing them became clear. The moment the rogue wolves disappeared from sight, Alaric's composure broke entirely. He rushed forward toward the boulders where his sons remained perched, and Cade, Theo, and Finn scrambled down to meet him, all three colliding into their father's arms at once, tears finally spilling freely now that the danger had passed. "You're safe," Alaric murmured over and over, holding all three boys tightly against him, his own voice thick with emotion he made no effort to hide in front of his gathered guards. "You're safe. I have you. You're safe." It was only after several long moments, once he had assured himself that his sons were truly unharmed, that Alaric looked up and finally saw Wren clearly, standing a short distance away, her clothes torn from 2 days of hard travel, a shallow scrape along her arm from scrambling up the rocky slope, and an expression caught somewhere between relief and quiet, guarded uncertainty about what would happen to her now that the danger had passed. "She protected us," Cade said immediately, pulling back slightly from his father's embrace to look him directly in the eyes. "The whole time, Father. At the river, and again just now. She never once thought about running to save herself. She kept putting herself between us and the danger." "She's telling the truth about the grain, too," Theo added earnestly, wiping his eyes. "We heard the servants talking. Corin only said what he said because Edmund frightened him into it." Alaric looked between his sons and Wren for a long moment, the full weight of the past 2 days settling heavily upon him. He had banished a wolf who, by every account and every action he had just witnessed with his own eyes, had done nothing but protect and care for his family, while he himself had allowed political convenience and hasty judgment to override the truth that had been standing directly in front of him all along. He crossed the distance between them slowly, and to the surprise of every guard watching, King Alaric, ruler of Moonfire Pack, lowered his head slightly, in a gesture of genuine humility rarely offered by any king. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "One far greater than words alone can properly repay. You protected my sons at great risk to yourself, after I failed you completely by believing lies I should have questioned far more carefully." Wren, exhausted and still trembling slightly from the adrenaline of the confrontation, managed a small, tired smile. "I never stopped believing the truth would matter eventually, my king. I only hoped it wouldn't take quite so much danger to prove it." "It won't happen again," Alaric said firmly, glancing meaningfully toward Garrick, who nodded in silent understanding. "I intend to discover exactly how this injustice came to pass, and I intend to correct it fully, the moment we return home." Finn, still clinging to Wren's side despite his father's presence, looked up at both adults with the simple, unwavering clarity that only a young cub could offer. "Does this mean Wren gets to come home with us now?" Alaric looked at his youngest son, then back at Wren, and for the first time since the ordeal began, something like real warmth flickered into his tired expression. "Yes," he said, his voice steady with certainty. "She is coming home, where she belongs, and this time, no one will question her place among us ever again." As the search party began the long journey back toward Moonfire Castle, Wren walking now not as a banished exile, but as an honored member of the group, the 3 cubs stayed close beside her the entire way, occasionally reaching out simply to touch her sleeve or hold her hand, as though reassuring themselves she was truly there, and truly safe. Behind them, unaware of the reckoning that awaited him back at the castle, Edmund rode near the rear of the party, his expression carefully composed, though his eyes betrayed the first faint traces of real fear. The journey back toward Moonfire Castle took the better part of the day, the search party moving at a slower, more careful pace to accommodate the exhaustion of the 3 young cubs and the wound along Ren's arm, which Mira, having joined the returning group partway through the forest, insisted on cleaning and bandaging properly the moment they paused to rest. "This should have been tended sooner," Mira muttered, examining the scrape with the practiced efficiency of decades spent as the pack's healer. "You're fortunate it didn't turn worse out there in the wild." "I've had worse scrapes tending goats," Ren said with a tired smile, though she winced slightly as Mira applied a soothing salve. "Goats don't chase you up boulders," Mira replied dryly, earning a small laugh from Ren, despite everything her body had endured over the past 2 days. Nearby, Alaric watched the exchange quietly, still processing the events of the morning. He had ridden hard through 2 days of fear and uncertainty, and now that his sons were finally safe, a different kind of unease had settled over him, the slow, uncomfortable recognition of how badly he had failed to see clearly when it mattered most. He found himself watching Ren more closely than he had in years, noticing details he had somehow overlooked despite her constant presence in his household, the quiet strength in how she carried herself, the genuine warmth with which his sons responded to her every word. "May I speak with you?" he asked, approaching once Mira had finished her work, and moved off to check on the boys. Ren looked up, a flicker of surprise crossing her features, before she nodded and rose to her feet, favoring her uninjured arm slightly. "Of course, my king." They walked a short distance from the resting group, close enough that the cubs remained within sight, but far enough to speak privately. Alaric was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "I've spent most of today thinking about how differently things might have gone," he said finally. "If my sons had not followed you, if you had not protected them as fiercely as you did, if Garrick had not questioned the trial's evidence when he did. So many small moments, any one of which could have ended in tragedy." "But they didn't," Ren said gently. "Your sons are safe, and that's what matters most now. It matters to me that I nearly lost them because of my own failure to look past convenient answers," Alaric said, his voice heavy with self-reproach. "I built a reputation as a fair ruler, and yet I allowed an innocent member of my own household to be cast out on evidence that barely deserved to be called evidence at all, simply because addressing it properly would have required more effort and attention than I was willing to give at the time." Ren considered his words carefully before responding. "You carry the weight of an entire pack's well-being on your shoulders every single day, my king. That doesn't excuse what happened to me, but I understand, perhaps better than most, how easily important things can slip past notice when there are so many demands pulling at your attention. That understanding is more generous than I deserve," Alaric said quietly. "Perhaps," Ren allowed with a small, tired smile. "But holding on to anger wouldn't have helped your sons find their way home safely these past 2 days, and it won't help fix whatever is broken within your council now either. Better to spend that energy making certain this never happens to anyone else." Alaric studied her for a long moment, something shifting behind his tired eyes, a recognition of depth and wisdom in her he had perhaps always sensed, but never fully acknowledged, until circumstances forced him to see it clearly. "You have my word," he said finally. "Whatever role you wish to hold within Moonfire from this day forward, it will be one that reflects the true value of everything you have given this family, not merely the convenience of what others found useful to overlook." As the sun began sinking toward late afternoon, the search party finally came within sight of Moonfire Castle's distant towers, and a ripple of relief passed visibly through the group. The boys, who had grown quiet with exhaustion during the long walk, perked up noticeably at the sight of home, Finn practically bouncing with renewed energy, despite everything his small body had endured. Word of their approach reached the castle well ahead of their arrival, and by the time the search party crossed through the main gates, a crowd of pack members had already gathered in the courtyard, drawn by whispered news that the missing princes had been found safe. A cheer rose up as Cade, Theo, and Finn came into view, walking beside their father with Ren close at their side, and the sound of genuine relief and celebration washed over the tired group like a warm embrace after 2 days of fear and uncertainty. But even amid the celebration, Alaric's expression remained set with quiet determination. His sons were safe, and for that he was profoundly grateful. But the matter of Ren's false accusation still remained unresolved, and he had no intention of allowing the truth to remain buried any longer than absolutely necessary. As the crowd began to disperse, and the boys were finally led toward the castle for much-needed food and rest, Alaric turned to Garrick with a look that left no room for delay. "Bring Corin to my study," he said firmly. "Tonight, we uncover the truth in full, no matter where it leads us." Corin arrived at the king's study trembling visibly, his eyes darting nervously between Alaric's stern expression and Garrick's imposing presence near the door. The young stable hand had clearly heard rumors already spreading through the castle about the prince's dangerous journey, and guilt sat heavily across his young features, even before a single question had been asked. "Sit," Alaric said, gesturing toward a chair across from his desk, his tone firm, but not unkind. "I want the truth tonight, Corin. All of it, no matter how difficult it may be to speak. Nothing you say in this room will bring further punishment upon you, if you are honest with me now." Corin lowered himself slowly into the chair, his hands twisting nervously in his lap. For a long moment, he said nothing, staring down at the floor, until finally, with a shaky breath, he began to speak. "I didn't see Ren near the storehouse that night," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I lied, my king. I'm so sorry. I lied." Alaric's jaw tightened, though he kept his voice steady. "Why would you lie about something so serious?" "Edmund came to me 2 days before the trial," Corin continued, tears beginning to slip down his cheeks. "He said if I testified that I'd seen Ren near the storehouse, he would make certain my family received better housing near the eastern quarter, and that my younger sister would be given a proper apprenticeship with the castle seamstress. My family has struggled for years, my king." And he made it sound so simple, just a few words, nothing that would truly harm anyone. "Nothing that would truly harm anyone," Alaric repeated, his voice hardening with barely controlled anger. "Your lie sent an innocent wolf into exile, and nearly cost my 3 sons their lives." Corin flinched, fresh tears spilling freely now. "I didn't know they would follow her into the forest, my king. I swear I never imagined anything so terrible would happen. I've barely slept since the trial, knowing what I'd done." Garrick stepped forward from his position near the door. "Did Edmund explain why he wanted Ren removed specifically? Surely there were simpler ways to secure favors for your family, without destroying someone else's life." Corin nodded miserably. He said Ren stood in the way of an important plan for the castle's future, though he never explained exactly what he meant by that. He only said his niece Clara deserved the chance to prove herself as caretaker for the young princes, and that Ren's presence made that impossible. The pieces Garrick had suspected earlier now clicked firmly into place within Alaric's mind. Edmund had orchestrated the entire false accusation, manipulating a desperate young wolf's love for his struggling family, in order to remove an obstacle standing between his niece and a position of significant influence within the royal household, a position that would have granted Edmund himself considerable indirect power over the future king's own sons. "Where is Edmund now?" Alaric asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "In his chambers, my king," Garrick replied. "I instructed the guards to keep a discreet watch on him the moment we returned, suspecting he might attempt something foolish once he realized the truth was coming to light." "Bring him here," Alaric ordered, "and bring Ren as well. She deserves to hear this confession with her own ears, and to witness whatever justice follows it." Within the hour, the study had filled with several key figures of the castle's inner circle. Ren stood quietly near the window, her expression carefully composed despite the obvious tension crackling through the room. Mira stood near her, a steadying presence, while Garrick positioned himself near the door, ensuring no one could leave before matters had been properly resolved. Edmund entered last, his usual composed smile notably absent, replaced by a wariness that only deepened when he saw Corin seated miserably near the king's desk, his tear-streaked face telling its own clear story. "My king," Edmund began smoothly, though a slight tremor betrayed his usual confidence. "I understand you wish to speak with me regarding tonight's events." "Corin has told me everything," Alaric interrupted, his voice cold and final. "About the bribe you offered his family in exchange for false testimony against Ren, about your plan, to install your niece as caretaker for my sons, about the lengths you were willing to go to secure influence within my household through deception and manipulation. Edmund's composure finally cracked entirely, his eyes darting toward the door as though calculating some desperate escape, though Garrick's solid presence there made clear that any such attempt would prove futile. My king, I only sought what I believed would best serve Moonfire's future. You sought power, Alaric said sharply, cutting through the excuse before it could fully form. You manipulated a frightened young wolf into destroying an innocent life, and in doing so, you very nearly cost me my 3 sons entirely. There is no version of that truth that serves anyone's future but your own ambitions. The room fell into heavy silence, broken only by Corin's quiet, remorseful sobbing. Edmund, finally recognizing the impossibility of his position, lowered his head, all pretense of innocence abandoned. What will happen to me? He asked quietly. Alaric considered the question for a long moment, his gaze moving briefly toward Ren, who remained silent by the window, watching the proceedings with an expression that held more sorrow than satisfaction, despite everything Edmund's schemes had cost her. You will be stripped of your position as advisor, effective immediately, Alaric said finally, and you will leave Moonfire lands by tomorrow's sunset, never to return. I offer you more mercy in this moment than you offered Ren during her trial, though you have earned considerably less. Edmund said nothing more, simply nodding once, before allowing the guards to escort him from the room. Corin remained seated, still trembling, awaiting whatever judgment the king intended for his own role in the deception. Your family will keep the housing improvements already promised to them, Alaric said, his tone softening slightly as he addressed the young stable hand. Your sister will still receive her apprenticeship. Those were honest needs, even if the path you took to address them was deeply wrong. But you will spend the coming months working directly under Garrick's supervision, earning back the trust you broke tonight, through honest effort rather than empty words. Corin nodded fervently, relief and lingering guilt mixing visibly across his young features. Thank you, my king. I promise I will earn it. As the study slowly emptied, Ren finally stepped forward from her place by the window, approaching Alaric with a quiet, thoughtful expression. Thank you, she said softly, for seeking the truth so thoroughly, even after everything had already gone so wrong. The truth was owed to you long before tonight, Alaric replied. I only regret it took so much danger to finally uncover it properly. News of Edmund's dismissal, and Ren's full exoneration, spread quickly through Moonfire Castle over the following days, and the reaction among the pack was one of quiet relief, mixed with genuine admiration for the Omega, who had risked everything to protect the young princes. Where once Ren had moved through the castle halls as a quiet, unremarkable presence, easily overlooked amid the daily business of pack life, she now found herself greeted warmly, wherever she walked, pack members pausing to offer their gratitude or simply to acknowledge the courage she had shown during those 2 dangerous days in the forest. A week after their return, King Alaric called together the full pack council in the Great Hall, the same room where Ren had once stood accused and alone, facing judgment without a single voice raised in her defense. This time, the hall filled not with cold judgment, but with a formal ceremony, meant to fully restore her standing within the pack, and to publicly acknowledge the grave injustice she had suffered. Standing before you today, Alaric announced to the gathered pack, his voice carrying clearly through the hall, is a wolf who was wrongfully accused, wrongfully banished, and who nonetheless faced tremendous danger to protect the most precious members of this pack, my own sons, without hesitation and without complaint. I failed her once through hasty judgment. I do not intend to fail her again. He turned to Ren, who stood before the assembled council with a composure that masked the quiet emotion swelling within her chest. From this day forward, Ren will hold an honored position within Moonfire Pack, not merely as caretaker to my sons, though she will always remain that to them in every way that matters, but as a respected member of this council, with a voice equal to any wolf who stands within these walls. A murmur of approval rippled through the hall, and Ren felt tears finally threatening to spill after days of holding herself together through exhaustion, danger, and uncertainty. She looked toward Cade, Theo, and Finn, standing proudly near their father, each of them beaming with open joy at the sight of her formal restoration. Thank you, she said softly, her voice trembling slightly with emotion she no longer tried to hide. I never sought recognition or position within this pack. I only ever wanted to see these 3 boys grow safely and happily, and to belong somewhere I could call home. That you would offer me both means more than words can properly express." After the formal ceremony concluded, the great hall transformed into a space of genuine celebration. Long tables filled with food brought out to mark the joyful occasion, and pack members mingling freely, sharing stories and laughter that filled the hall with a warmth it had sorely lacked during the tense days of Ren's banishment and the desperate search that followed. Finn, no longer restrained by any sense of formality, climbed directly into Ren's lap the moment she sat down, declaring loudly, to anyone within earshot, that she was the bravest wolf in the entire kingdom, a claim Theo enthusiastically seconded between mouthfuls of celebratory feast. Cade, though quieter in his affection as always, settled beside Ren with a small, genuine smile, the kind of easy contentment that had been entirely absent from his expression during their difficult journey through the forest. "I'm glad you're home," he said simply, and in those few words, Ren heard everything he had carried silently throughout their ordeal, finally allowed to rest. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down and the boys, thoroughly exhausted from the excitement of the day, were finally coaxed toward their beds, Alaric found Ren standing quietly on a balcony, overlooking the moonlit forest beyond the castle walls, the same forest that had nearly cost them everything only days before. "A difficult few days," he said, joining her at the railing. "The most difficult I can remember," Ren agreed with a small, tired smile, "though I find myself grateful for how it ended, despite everything that came before." "I owe you more than a restored position and a formal apology," Alaric said quietly, his eyes fixed on the distant tree line. "You showed me something these past days that I had somehow overlooked, despite years of watching you care for my sons, a strength and clarity of judgment that this pack and this family would be fortunate to keep close for many years to come." Ren glanced at him, catching something new and unguarded in his expression, a warmth that extended beyond simple gratitude or formal acknowledgement. "I intend to stay," she said softly, "for as long as your sons need me, and for as long as this pack will have me." "Good," Alaric said, a genuine smile finally breaking through the weariness of the past week, "because I find, rather unexpectedly, that Moonfire feels considerably less complete without you standing somewhere within its walls." Below them, the forest stretched out silent and peaceful beneath the silver light of the moon. The same wild darkness that had nearly claimed everything precious to the Moonfire pack now settled into quiet stillness, as though the land itself understood that balance had finally been restored. Inside the castle, 3 young princes slept soundly in their beds for the first time in days, no longer troubled by fear or uncertainty, secure in the knowledge that the wolf who had always protected them remained close by, not as a distant memory of banishment and loss, but as a permanent and cherished part of the only home they had ever known. And as the moon climbed higher above Moonfire's towers, casting its gentle light across a kingdom finally at peace, Ren allowed herself, for the first time in longer than she could remember, to simply breathe easily, knowing that whatever challenges still lay ahead, she would face them, not as an outcast standing alone at the edge of the wilderness, but as a true and valued member of a family she had helped to build with quiet devotion, one small act of kindness at a time.